Good morning and welcome to the Morning Spotlight Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Ham, coming to you as always from the Spotlight Studios here in Morristown, New Jersey. My guest today is one of the millions of super fans who credits James Taylor with turning her life around. As a latchkey teen in the 1970s, she was lured into a cult until the music and lyrics of James Taylor spoke to her soul and she felt understood. However, her story is not unique. In 2015, she created a Facebook page, Life with James Taylor, to connect with fans and share stories. She began collecting stories from fans around the world and created That's Why We're Here, stories from passionate James Taylor fans to share these heartfelt stories. She's also the author and founder of yogic writing, a practice that utilizes the philosophies and disciplines of yoga, meditation, and journaling to help writers of all levels heal, reveal, and leave a legacy through writing life stories. She is Rebecca Gold. Rebecca, welcome to the show.
Hi, Mike. Thanks. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited to have you. So I think we were talking about this before. This is going to be a very unique episode for the Morning Spotlight
Awesome.
for sure, which I always love because it's like a new thing and it's a lot of stuff, not everything I haven't talked about before. We've never talked about James Taylor, just full disclosure, on this show.
Why not? Why not?
Well, I know, but, and also in full disclosure, I don't know if this is going to rub you the wrong way, but before I got on here, I was like setting up everything, getting my mics all together, and my girlfriend's out in the other room. I was like, quick, play some James Taylor because like I just need to remember,
That's
James
great.
Taylor songs. So yeah, I mean, like let's talk about that. Let's start with that. So what is behind the fascination behind, I would say the original JT? I mean, everyone knows Justin Timberlake is the new JT, but I'm sure James Taylor is the original JT.
Oh my God. I give my kids shit about that all the time. All the time when they go, Ma, JT is Justin Timberlake. I'm like, no. So that's like a big no-no in our house.
Yeah.
Nobody is allowed to call anybody other than James Taylor JT. So that's great. Yeah, I've been, my family calls me obsessed, but I don't think it's obsessed. I just think it's just a heartfelt appreciation, and I say I do credit him for saving my life because it really was a terrible, very low point in my life when I was introduced just divinely, magically to the James Taylor music, and as you said in the intro. It was in the early 70s and things were a lot different then.
For sure.
And I was about 14 years old and my parents were going through a divorce. My mom she was in an arranged Greek marriage, a homemaker, 4 kids, had never been on her own before. My father left. And my mom was like, oh my God, there's a big world out there that I want to grab. So she became a teenager and had teenagers to raise at the same time.
Yeah.
So we kind of were all in this teenager mode together in many ways and on our own. And I really was on my own. And in the 70s, it sounds like there was more of that, obviously, than there is today, I think. And we just did things without much, without a lot of people looking after us.
Right.
And I got involved in some really terrible stuff because of that.
Yeah.
A lot of, drugs. And I got involved with a man that was the leader of the Adidam cult, which I didn't know it at the time. And he just kind of sucked us teenagers in and took advantage of the needing someone to talk to and be with.
Yeah.
And it was really, really dangerous and scary. And I didn't know how to get out of it. And then one day in music class, I was in my music class and I went to school and I was really quiet, stood in the back of the room, because I was in my own little messed up world. And my music teacher, Mrs. Almeida, comes flowing in, with her guitar on her back and her embroidered shirt and skirt, like all the hippies did, right? And she's like, oh, everybody, I want to introduce you to this new musician, James Taylor. And I didn't know who it was. And the record player, I know you're young, Mike, maybe you don't know what all this stuff looks like, but I can still visualize the record, the needle going down on the record player. And there begins this guitar intro and James Taylor singing Fire and Rain. And I had never heard of I'd never heard of him. And she put the album cover up front and I heard this voice and the voice was like, oh shit, who is that? And I just kind of made my way up to the front of the room. And he started singing, just yesterday morning, they let me know you were gone. Suzanne, the plans I made put an end to you. And he starts singing this song. And I just like something about the words in the song, the emotions in the song, what he was singing about, just like broke me apart, just like broke me open. And I just started to just to cry, and everything that I had been going through was just like, oh my God, he gets it. Somebody gets it.
Right.
Because in this cult experience, we were told very, succinctly and strongly that we were not allowed to talk about it with anybody, what was going on behind closed doors.
Yeah.
And I'm like, he gets it. He gets how lonely I am, how abandoned I feel, how depressed I am. He got all of it. So I went home, I went to the music store. I said to the owner of the music store, it's called a Music Box, and I said, can you tell me anything about James Taylor? And he's like, well, have you been hiding under a rock? Of course I know James Taylor. Like, where have you been? So he digs out these records, and I'm like, I don't have any money, but I need to listen to more. And he gave me Sweet Baby James to take home with me.
Okay.
And I took it home and I listened to every freaking song on that record like a gazillion times. And I really felt like, okay, somebody gets it. I'm not alone. I can get through this. I can get out of this. And I just started writing everything in my journal, everything that was going on that I wasn't supposed to tell anybody.
Right.
And I just kept writing it and writing it and writing it. And I left it open on the living room table in hopes that when my mom came home, because she was bartending and waitressing and out partying, I was hoping that when she came home, she would read it. And she did. And she read it the next day, and she was like, oh, shit, there's something bad going on here. And to make a long story short, she helped me get the help that I needed at that point to be able to get out of that really bad situation and get the help and be okay.
Yeah.
And James Taylor from that point on was just like my therapist. It's like every album that would come out, I'm like, okay, where's my song, James? And I would look and I would listen to the song. Oh, thank you. That one's for me.
Yeah.
And it was just that deep of a connection. And I've seen him in concert probably close to 80 times by now.
Okay.
And he's a really, really generous performer. And at the intermission and at the end of the show, he always comes out and shakes hands with his fans and takes pictures. And except this year because of COVID, he doesn't.
Sure, right.
So I have selfies with him, and I've thanked him a gazillion times. And every time I go to concerts, I meet other people, and I'm like, you love James, and we share stories. And so I'm not the only lunatic on there that he has touched to that. It's kind of like the Grateful Dead and the Deadheads, they're all there and they're all one and the same.
Right.
But this is different because it's just like, oh my God, he saved me, and James is a recovering addict. So a lot of people are there too. That says he helped me with my recovery or he helped me through my divorce, or he helped me with the death of whatever. I mean, his songs are really deep and touching. So that's it in the long, and I just really felt like I needed to share it.
Yeah, no, I love that. I think that that's something that's so cool because I feel like we've talked about a lot of different things on this show over the lifespan of it, going on a year and a half now. And I think one of the things that I always love to hear is like people's passions about certain things. And it doesn't matter what it is, like we had a guy on here, several weeks ago, and he was talking about his passion for like fandom and comic books and that kind of stuff. And that's not really up my alley. But then we started talking about it. I'm like, oh, this is like so interesting and so cool about how he got himself to that point. And this is very similar. Obviously you have like a terrible life experience, and you find something that is able to kind of pull you out of that. And now, you look like you got yourself together right now, and it sounds like you do. So that's good. One of the questions that I did have over the course of that story is the idea that like, you write all this stuff down that you weren't supposed to talk about and you leave it for your mom to read. Was that difficult? Was she like the closest one to you at that point that you thought you could talk to? Just because it was kind of like you said at the beginning, it was like a lot of, she became a teenager again, and it was just a lot of teenagers just trying to like figure life out. Or was that just like the closest person you'd be like, here as like a Hail Mary, like here, like, let's try this.
Yeah, it's a great question. I really feel like, we say, and my mom talks about it, she's 81 years old right now, and she knows about that period of time in her life, and she talks about it very openly. And so it's no secret that she was also exploring, she married a man 20 years younger than her, and then divorced and married another one. And like, she was all of that. But so we've talked about it, and she owns it. But at the time, she was still my mom. Right. So it was still like, I was still this 14-year-old girl going, who can help me? Maybe my mom can. Yeah. So even though all of those other things were happening, I knew at my core that my mother can help me.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I did leave that for her.
Right.
And in the way she helped me was really kind of fit in line with what was going on too. She like gave me money to go to a therapist or a psychologist, they called them in those days. And she gave me the money to go to a psychologist. I went once, but every week she gave me money and I went to the music store and I would buy more James Taylor records. You know, she had no idea what I was doing with the money,
Right.
but it didn't matter. It
Right.
didn't matter because
you were
she
going
heard
to your
me.
therapy. That
I
was
was
your
going
therapy.
to my therapy,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
she'd give me the money and I would go buy more therapy. And so the way she helped me was really just to kick me off or to kick me out of what was happening.
Yeah.
Like she didn't go to the police and she didn't go to his home. She didn't do any of those things that I'll tell you what, if my kid did told me about something like that, that's the first thing that I would do. I would be like,
100%.
all right, this guy's going down. Right?
Yeah, right.
But in those days it wasn't, because the whole thing was like, oh shoot, you got messed up with that. Let's figure out how to get you feeling okay.
Yeah.
So it was more about how I could feel okay, not necessarily what they were doing.
Right. So let's talk about like the comeback, right?
Yeah.
The comeback of
Yeah.
Rebecca Gold. So like, you have that happen. You are basically doing your music therapy with James Taylor
Yeah.
with the money that your mom gave her. And if she
Right.
listens to this, like we won't let her know. We won't tell her where her money was going. But even though she probably knows by now, I would imagine.
Oh yeah.
But
yeah.
but so talk to me about like, the kind of the comeback, because obviously as someone that's never been a part of a cult, I would imagine that, that it kind of messes with your brain and like
Yeah.
how you perceive things. And I think that
Yeah.
like, kind of on the way back, was that difficult to kind of get yourself back? Like, I'm not going to say normal, but just kind of
Mhm.
like back on the right track.
Yeah. Well, luckily it wasn't like we weren't on our own in a different place. I mean,
Yeah.
he was posing as a guitar teacher.
Okay.
So what I was going to quote unquote guitar lessons.
Got it.
And I would go to these guitar lessons, which turned out to be parties and kind of like this this indoctrination of Aridam and all of that. And so it was kind of like, oh, she's going to guitar lessons. And I would go once or twice a week. I would go on the weekend. So I wasn't living there.
Yeah.
So even though, yes, there was a lot of brain just, messed up stuff
Sure.
going on, I could come home and I was still going to school and I didn't have many friends, but I did have a few friends. I couldn't talk to them about it. I did have a boyfriend. I brought my boyfriend to the meeting one time. So he kind of saw what was going on.
Yeah.
And then he broke up with me because I think he scared the shit out of him. So, so that really wasn't a very good, plan. But but once I knew that, and my mom confirmed that you are never going back there again. She was pretty clear on that.
Right.
She did take on that mom role, and I knew I wouldn't go back there again. Then I could get back into my school and my music, which was always really important to me, and kind of get back into that, as you say, quote unquote, normal life.
Right.
But I knew I had somebody that I could talk to about it and that I could relate to about it, even though I'd never met him. But it was a feeling of someone else has got my back on this.
Yeah.
And I was able to, to kind of continue and finish school. And I was always a good student. I was always smart and, and all of that. So I was able to kind of get back on a path that was healthy for me.
Yeah. Which I think is great. And like you mentioned too, it's like, I think a lot of times when people are, in like a bad place, whatever that bad place may come from,
Mhm.
sometimes you feel like you're kind of the only person that feels that way. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
And then it just takes like one other person to be like, hey, I feel the same way. You know what I mean?
That's
You
right.
find like that
That's
connection, and all of a sudden, not that it makes your problems feel like they're not really problems anymore, but it just kind of like takes that burden off you that you're the only one carrying this. And I think that that's awesome. So
Yeah.
kind of as
Mhm.
the the passion for James Taylor
Mhm.
and all that
Mhm.
kind of progresses,
Mhm.
and you get your I'm assuming you graduate from high school, kind of get on
Yep.
with life
Yep.
and all that kind of stuff. The business, the yogic writing, when does that come into play? Because I'm trying to we're going to try to go chronologically as best we can over the course of
Yeah.
this episode, because there's more James
Yeah.
Taylor coming, spotlighters
Right.
that's coming. So we're going to talk more about that. But talk
Right,
about
right.
yogic writing and kind of how
Sure.
that came to be.
Sure. Well, I mean, I became a writer. I became a writer. So not only did the music of James Taylor, as I say, save my life, but it did so through writing. So I would write about it and I would write about it. And so I did become a writer. And I graduated high school and then I went to college and then I learned more about writing and I started writing. I started writing for children. I was doing I wrote a book about adoption after I got married. We adopted a child. I wrote a book about adoption. I wrote a biography I did some technical writing. So I just kind of really just fall into the writing world. So that it was kind of a gateway to say writing not only was healing, but it was also something I was loving and I was passionate about and I was good at.
Yeah.
So I started writing and writing. And as I said, I spent many years writing about parenting and writing even books about computers in the early 80s when computers came out. And so I became a technical writer. What I couldn't do was write about that deep story, my trauma. I couldn't write about that.
Yeah.
Because every time I started to, it was like, nope, not going there, not going there. So instead I would write all of these beautiful stories, as I said, about adopting a child, about parenting, about, all these great things. But there was still that really deep story hiding that I couldn't write.
Right.
And I'm a late bloomer. And I, in my 40s, I got really depressed. And I had no reason to be depressed. I was teaching, I had beautiful kids, I was writing, everything was great in my life. But this depression just kind of took over. And that does happen with depression. It happens when you're not even sad.
Yeah.
Depression and sadness are two different things. And at the core of that was like, what is going on? Why am I feeling like there's something that has to that I have to break through from? And
right.
And my daughter, who was a teenager at the time, my oldest daughter, said, "Ma, you got to go to yoga." I'm like, no, I'm not going to yoga. Yoga to me was synonymous with the cult that I had been through in my, no, I'm not going to listen to some guru. They don't know what the hell they're talking about. I'm not going to do Eastern philosophy. No.
Yeah.
Because to me, it felt like the same. And she's like, "No, you got to go to yoga. You got to go to yoga." So I'm like, okay, fine. When your teenager tells you should do something, you do it, right? As a mom.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, I'm doing it. So I went to yoga and I'm like, okay, this is just too hard. And then she's like, "Well, I'll try another one." I went to another one. I'm like, this is weird. Went to another one and just kind of played with it a little bit. And then when Natalie Goldberg, who was one of the writers that I love, was doing a retreat at a yoga center in the Berkshires, actually,
Okay.
Kripalu Yoga Center. And I'm like, all right, I'll go to that. That way I'll get a little bit more about yoga, but I love Natalie Goldberg's writing. So I went there as a writing retreat and ended up really just doing more yoga. And I'm thinking, what is going on here? So
this is not what I signed up for, Natalie.
This is not what I signed up for. Yoga, meditation, like what the F, So as I was doing it and I became more and more involved in it, my writing just like flourished in a way that it had never been before.
Yeah.
It got really deep. It got really authentic. I was writing about things that had happened to me in my teenagehood. I was writing about stuff that I was too afraid to talk about. And I'm like, there is a connection here between yoga and writing. And I got to get deep and figure this shit out because it was strong. And so that's what I did. So then I just went into full on research mode and said, what is this connection? And started learning about the connections between yoga, meditation, mostly meditation. Because when you say yoga, people think, oh, standing on your heads, and that's not my yoga.
Right.
That's not my yoga.
Yeah, sweating your ass off, in uncomfortable positions. I can't even touch my toes, so that's not really a thing for me.
That's not what the yoga thing. You will not see me on the cover of Yoga Journal. That's not what it's about, right? So but it was the idea of getting in touch with your true self, your true, what is at the core of yourself, and getting in touch with it through means like different breathwork practices, mindfulness practices. All of these practices that I was learning were actually making my writing just come alive.
Yeah.
And I'm like, this stuff is amazing. So I created workshops and classes, and I started teaching this to people, and people also, women like me, mostly women. I mean, I didn't say it was only women, but women were attracted to this more. And I started this business that I call yogic writing, which is, I say we write to heal, we write to reveal, we write to leave our legacy. And people go, I have this story and I don't know how to write it because I'm blocked. I can't get through the stuckness of it. It's too hard. And so I would work with them in group formats or in retreat formats and show them this new way that I learned, which I call yogic writing.
Yeah.
And that's how that happened.
Yeah. So we've talked to one other person that has like a author and helps other
Hmm.
authors and all that kind of stuff. And
Hmm.
I'm interested to kind of get your take on a similar question that I had asked her a while back. Is this like, now I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to like softball one up for you right now. Does you talk about like getting in touch with yourself and finding the story that's in you? Does
Yeah.
everybody have a story to share?
Everybody has a story to share. Everybody has multiple stories to share.
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many stories to share. And what's interesting is you don't even know. Sometimes I think that, part of our work, just being on this earth, is just finding the stories to share. Like, you don't even know. You might meet somebody and something gets triggered by a conversation you have with them, and you think about something, you go, oh my God, that happened to me, or that reminds me of, and memories will start flooding, just from triggers as you move through life. And then you find out that story is really important to someone else.
Yeah.
And that's why I say, no, everybody has stories to share. Everybody has multiple stories to share. I always get the question of, who cares about my story?
Exactly.
Like,
Right.
so
Yeah.
what?
Yeah.
Big
Like
deal.
what am
It's
I going to write
over.
about, with that
Right.
people are actually going to read?
Exactly. Like,
Yeah.
it's like, who cares? And I always raise my hand. I go, I care. I care. Like, you don't know who cares until
Right.
you share your story. You
Yeah.
just don't know.
Yeah.
I belong to a story sharing group here in Newport, Rhode Island. I live in Providence, but I used to live in Newport. It's called Born to Rise. And we get together usually about once every other month at a restaurant, and we bring in people. Again, we open it to men and women, but 90% of them are women, or 95% are women that show up. And we share stories. We maybe 5 or 6 of them each night, and they'll get up and they'll share their story. And there's always somebody in the audience that just, like, they needed to hear it. They needed to hear what that person had to share.
Yeah.
And they're not always like these deep, intense, I was assaulted. I mean, they're not always like these traumatic stories.
Right.
Sometimes they're just beautiful, light, happy stories. And somebody goes, I needed to hear that today.
Yeah.
So everybody's got a ton of stories.
Yeah. No, I listen, I 1,000,000% agree. Now, I've never written a book. I don't know if I ever
Mhm.
would, but I talk to people all the time. I, do, like, I feel like this is sharing stories, like we're learning your
Mhm.
story just in a different format. And I go on other podcasts all the time, like you're doing with me.
Mhm.
And I talk about
Mhm.
my stuff too.
Right.
I think I'm relatively
Right.
interesting, I guess. So other people seem to think so. But, it's one of those things where people, they kind of like, they see people writing books and it's like, oh, Barack Obama wrote a book. Like, obviously
Right.
people are going to read that because it's Barack Obama. Everybody knows who that is, but
Sure.
like Mike Ham, is anybody going to read that? But,
Mhm. Mhm.
somebody out there could read it
Right.
and benefit from it. So I think that's
Right.
awesome.
Right.
So,
Like, somebody might
yeah,
say to you, Mike, they would say, like, how did you get into this podcasting thing? Like what's your story of getting to that?
yeah,
And you might share that story, and somebody was like deep inside going, I really want to be able to do this. I can't do this. I could never be a podcast host. I would never be able to talk to people. And they hear your story and they might just go like, hey, wait a minute, maybe I can.
yeah,
So even just a story of, how you
right.
got to whatever it is that you're doing
Exactly.
triggers somebody else and connects us.
Yeah, 100%. And
Mhm.
so as we kind of progress through this chronological, as best I can, storyline. So
Love it.
2000, when did you say that you started the Facebook group, the James Taylor Facebook
Yeah,
group?
that was in 2015. I
2015.
started the Facebook group because
We're back on James Taylor in case anybody
we're
missed
back on
that.
JT. We're
Yeah.
back on JT. Yeah.
JT.
Uh, we're back on JT. Yeah. So I never stopped throughout my whole since my teenagehood. Whenever James was in concert, I was the first one to get a ticket. And
Yeah.
it's funny. I'll just tell you a quick story. The first concert that I went to, I was 17, so I had already been a fan for 3 years, and or whatever. And he was coming to Newport, Rhode Island, where I was living, where I was going to school, and I didn't have any money. Again, I grew up like with zero money.
Yeah.
My mom had 4 kids to raise, and my dad was MIA, so we didn't have money to buy concert tickets. So, so a friend of mine who was a really good friend of mine, probably my best friend, he said to me, I've got this idea. it's an outdoor concert. Again, this is 1980, maybe 1979, 80, something like that. He said, go get dressed in black pants and a white top. I'm bringing food. We're going to be the caterers. So we got dressed as a catering company, me and my friend, 17 years old. And it was a guy. And we dressed like we were the caterers. We took chicken, potato salad. We cooked it. My mom actually helped cook it. And we went to Fort Adams with these trays of chicken and potato salad. We went to right up to the stage, right up to the, where they were collecting tickets, like we were supposed to be there. And we're like, no, we're the catering company. We have the food for the Taylors. Where do we go in? And they're like, oh, over there. So we go over there and we go backstage, just walking in like we own the place with chicken and potato salad, walking in. And there it is. There's James, there's Carly. He was married to Carly Simon at the time. Their kids were there. There's all sorts of people. And there we were with chicken and potatoes. And we're like, we put it down and, and they thought we were the caterers and they just let us sit back there while they got the chicken. And I was cutting up chicken for, James Taylor's daughter, Sally. And I'm just going like, I can't believe I'm here, and my friend, Sean, his name was, he's like, stop, just keep acting like you're supposed to be there. Yeah. Keep cool. And I'm like, I'm about to pass out. That's James Taylor over there. He's like, cut the chicken. So so it's like, so from that point on, it was like, every time he would come, I couldn't do the catering thing anymore. That was just a once and done.
Right. Yeah. You can't try that multiple times. I feel like at some point they're going to be like, wait a minute. Yeah.
Especially today, the security, right? I tell that story and people go, no way. And I'm like, well, today, no way.
Yeah.
But I go to as many concerts as I can. So the James Taylor thing has always been threaded through. And as I was saying, I meet people at concerts and we share stories.
Yeah.
So in 2015, when I started getting to the Facebook thing and I'm like, you know what? I'm not the only one. I want to have a platform here for other people to share their stories. So I created this page called Life with James Taylor, because I always say my life is with James Taylor. And I created this page called Life with James Taylor. And sure enough, people are like, oh God, this happened to me. And we were starting sharing stories. And then I started sharing, pictures and video clips from concerts, and other people did too. And it was just kind of this fun side gig that I was having fun with. And now it's about 25,000 people on there.
Right.
And James Taylor's on tour right now. And people go on and they share a clip of, where they saw him and or their favorite song. And we talk about when's the first time you heard him. And it's just this big conversation. And there's some great, great stories. So during COVID, when COVID first hit, I hate that sound of that. When the shutdown happened.
Right.
I was like, you know what? I was really consoled through. James Taylor put out this thing called Songs of Comfort, and he did a couple of shows from his living room. And I mean, he's just so wonderful. And he did I'm sorry, but I'm gushing.
That's all right.
So he did all of this. He just did all of this wonderful stuff, and I felt really compelled to share more of the stories. And I had more time because all of my retreats were canceled. All of my yoga writing retreats were canceled, obviously. And so I started collecting the stories and I said, you know what, I'm going to create a book. And I really want to have this book be a collection of some of these beautiful stories that had been shared with me as a tribute and as a thank you. And I just felt like this really need to give James my gratitude, along with the 80 people, and there were so many more, that contributed their stories to the book. So I got the stories, I collected the stories, a few are mine. And as I said, there's about 80 contributors. I did the editing of it. I put it together. I worked with a self-publishing company. And I think the book looks beautiful. My husband took the picture. I'm wearing my favorite James Taylor hat.
Yeah. I love the cover personally. It's on the website, lifewithjamestaylor.com. There's the website plug right there. I think it's a great cover. The record, ticket. Is that a ticket? Yep. Yeah, ticket.
Yeah, that's a ticket at 45 record, which is what I used to buy.
Yeah.
My hat, and that's me on there. And it's funny because the day that this cover, my husband took the picture, and he's not a photographer, but I had for the cover, it was going to be a picture of James Taylor reaching out to his fans. And I had to clear the picture with his lawyers and with his people.
Right.
And I had the whole thing ready. And then at the last minute, they said, no, you can't use that picture. Yeah. And even though it was my picture, they didn't want they didn't allow that. And I was so pissed. I'm like, damn it, now what am I going to do? Everything is ready. And my husband's like, would you just go shut up, go get your record, go get your ticket, put your hat on, I'll take a picture.
Yeah.
So it was that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
all right, I still love you. And I just stood there like, like this little 6-year-old girl going, I love you.
Yeah.
And I look at the picture, I'm like, it couldn't have been better. So I love it.
Yeah.
So, I love the picture.
At some point in that, you said that the book was kind of like a thank you from you and the fans to James Taylor. But do you think that it was also maybe, and again, I'm not in the Facebook group, so this is not, this is not a softball question. This is one that I'm saying, like, so this is something that started around the start of like the shutdowns and all that kind of stuff. And I think one of the things that we kind of talked about at the very beginning was you felt very alone at the beginning, and you found like that connection with James Taylor. So there was, like we said before, I mean, if you have problems or issues or whatever, sometimes you tend to think that you're the only one with those problems. Then you get into this scenario where everybody was dealing with a lot of crazy stuff and, everything that happened in early 2020. So is like the thank you also kind of to the people that were sharing the stories and helping everybody, the group, get through those early days, those early months, all that kind of stuff.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what we did, because we did get together and talk about the stories and talk about how we were all in this together. And as a writer, and not only with the James Taylor, but to kind of bridge that gap again, when that happened in March, when the shutdown happened, I actually created another Facebook group, a program that I call the Chronicles. And I invited all these people in that I knew, some from the James Taylor page, some from students that I'd had. And I said, come on, guys, we all need to get together and write about what we're going through for our own sanity.
Yeah.
Again, writing has been my dose of antidepressant, my dose of healing. And so I brought together a lot of people, and we all wrote our stories. And every day I would give them a prompt. Every day I would give them a writing prompt, and we would write about what was going on, either during that time, during what was going on during the 2020, shutdown period, or what was going on that in their family history or in old stories that they're being reminded of. And it was a way of connecting. So we all connected. I had a Facebook group. We would meet on the group. We would share our stories. And again, some people came in from the James Taylor site. Some people came in from other places. But it was just a place where we all knew. I always say, during that time, and still today, when you say, how are you? We all know what we're talking about.
Yeah.
At least back then, in April, May, June of 2020, we were like, how you doing? And they knew they weren't talking about, did you stub your toe? They knew you were talking about, how are you dealing with this?
Right.
So, and that was kind of the gift, I think, of the whole pandemic, that we were so connected that we weren't afraid to ask somebody who we didn't even know, how you doing?
Right.
How you doing?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's just one of those things too, where it's like, here in Jersey, I think Rhode Island's somewhat similar. Everything just moves like a little bit quicker out here than it does maybe in other parts of the country, other parts of the world. And I think that like, you just kind of forget that, you have like, feelings and a personality in a lot of cases. I mean, that was my gift, like I learned that like I could just be myself. Like I don't have to keep putting on the masks and doing all these different things and trying to appease a lot of people. I'm just going to like give it to you. And if you don't like it, then whatever, like you're not part of the group.
That's right. So life is short.
Exactly. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
So, the other question I had too is like, we're talking about these stories and like, has there been, maybe it's the James Taylor side, maybe it's the other Facebook group that you started. Has there been like a story that's just like, you hear it from someone and maybe it was like, maybe one that they were hesitant to share and then they share it and it's just like, whoa, like that is amazing. Like how did talk to me about that.
Yeah, we've had a lot of breakthrough moments, a lot of crying, a lot of moments. And I still, like right now, I lead a couple of groups that I call From Your Mat to Your Memoir. Mat, is the yoga mat, and I really help people write their life stories. And when people share stories, there's been a lot of those kind of just, breakdown moments, breakthrough moments, breakdown moments, because sometimes all it takes is for you to start to say out loud or to write down something for you to feel relief from it, to let it go. And that's part of the process, to let it go.
Yeah.
So yeah, those have been the most meaningful. And even in the James Taylor book, some people, they would send me a story and say, well, my favorite song, because I always ask them, well, what's your favorite James Taylor song? Or what's your favorite this? And this one woman, I remember, she wrote, well, my favorite song, I have one for each of my kids, and my daughter is Your Smiling Face, and my other daughter is blah, 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 and my son is Something in the Way She Moves. And I'm like, what? Why would that be a song for your son? Something in the Way She Moves. Because if you know the song, it's really a love song, Something in the Way She Moves, and not the Beatles song, but the James Taylor song. And I'm like, why that? And she goes, well, because he went through a really hard time and that song helped him. I'm like, what did he go through? Well, he was da-da-da. What about the song? Well, da-da-da, and bit by bit by bit, like this whole story came out, and she ended up just like crying her eyes out, thinking about this horrific problem that her son was going through, this deep, deep depression. And the only thing that helped him is when she sat next to him and she held his hand, and and part of the words, the lyrics in the song is, it's not what you say, but the fact that you're saying it. I'm bastarding the words, but she would say that's what got to him, that piece, that lyric, that was just like, it doesn't matter what you're saying, but the fact that you're here holding my hand, saying something to me.
Yeah.
And it, and so she was writing this, and the story's in the book, and it was just something so like bizarre. And she didn't even know how deep and meaningful it was until bit by bit by bit, we started like dissecting it and dissecting it and dissecting it. And that's when and then she felt like, oh my God, I feel so much better now because it's out there, it's out there and it's free.
Yeah, no, that's amazing. And like, so far, like all the stories that we're sharing on this show right now, or this episode in particular, are amazing. And this is very interesting to me. Like, I didn't really know what we were going to talk about. Like we said before, I don't know what we're going to talk about. We're just going to kind of go for it, but this has just been incredible. So people that may be like, outside of like the James Taylor group, or outside of the other Facebook group and some of the other stuff that you do, we're talking about like, people having stories, and people that, are maybe like either hesitant or don't really know where to start. So if there's people out there, because we have like a lot of young professionals that listen to this show, 25 to 35 is my general age range of primary listeners. So if like they have an inkling of maybe trying to like put pen to paper or start hitting the keys, like what's kind of like the first thing that they need to do? Is there a first thing, or is it just kind of like everybody's different?
No, I think that's a great question. I always say, step one is going back to step zero. There's a step zero in writing a book. There's a step zero in writing your story, and the step zero. And I think with that 25 to 35-year-olds, when I talk about meditation, I don't get a lot of pushback from people in that age group. They know it, maybe a lot of people don't meditate on a regular basis, but they know what I'm talking about. Like if I talk about this with an older group, they're like, what are you talking about? So I think it's getting a lot more mainstream. And so the first step, I always say in this, is really getting grounded. And the best way to get grounded is just a 5-minute meditation, which can be counting your breath, closing your eyes and counting your breath, 1, 2, 3, 4, as you inhale, and making it a little longer as you exhale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And doing that, just simple breath practice with your eyes closed for 5 minutes, or 3 if you really can't deal with it, to just ground yourself and be in your body and be in your breath before you take pen to paper. And as that grounding begins, and then you can just say, okay. And then you said, put your hand on your keyboard. And that's where I say, no, the first thing is literally pen to paper, because you're going from your mind through your body, and the body being pen to paper, to the page. And that process, mind, body, page, is really the first step. And I start with a prompt. I offer people prompts all the time if they don't know what to write about. But many times when you're just doing that mindfulness, that grounding meditation, and then you come out and you take your pen and you take on the journal or on a piece of paper and just say, what am I feeling like today? Today I feel, and just something that simple. Today I feel, today I want 5 minutes. That's it. So you have your 5-minute grounding meditation, your 5-minute free write. So it's only a 10-minute practice. And if you do that every day at any time during the day, you're teaching yourself, you're rewiring your brain that I am a writer.
Yeah.
I am a writer. And that affirmation and doing that grounding, writing, I am a writer. And you can even use the prompt, I am a writer. Today I'm going to write about, I am a writer. Today I feel. It doesn't even matter what you're writing, but you're training yourself. You're teaching yourself that you can do this, that you can move from your mind through your body to the page and you can write. And if you do that for 5 minutes or 10 minutes a day, then you go, okay, I want to write a book, or I want to write this story, or I want to write something about what happened to me. After that practice, maybe a week later, you're still doing the practice every day, but at another point in the afternoon, you're going to go, okay, I'm going to write a story. Your body already knows, oh, click, we're writing. Oh, I get this. I know how to write. Yeah. Let's write the story.
Right.
So it's kind of a training, just like any training, to run or to sports training, whatever. The training piece is really important. You were a baseball coach, right, Mike?
Yeah.
Do I remember that
Yeah,
right?
I am.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good
right.
research out of you.
Yeah. I remember that when you said, because I'm a huge baseball fan, but you're probably a Yankees fan. I'm a Red Sox fan, but all right, we got that going. But anyway, we'll ignore that for a minute. But,
good thing we didn't lead with that, because we would just end the episode 40 minutes ago.
Right. But the importance of training.
Yeah.
So you don't just go, okay, guys, we're going to go play a game right now. And you don't just run out and play the game. No, you do the training. And it's the same thing with writing. You don't just write a book. You have to train yourself. And that 5 minutes can lead to 10 minutes, can lead to 15. And then at another point you say, okay, now I'm going to write, because now I've been training and now I can begin to write a story.
Yeah.
So that's always where I start with people. I'm like, oh, I have this great story I want to write. I'm like, back up. First, we're going to take some training time, and we're going to teach yourself that you are a writer.
Yeah. No, I love that. That was a great answer. And maybe I'm going to try that.
Yeah. Do it for a week. See what happens.
And see what happens. Right. The keeping the eyes closed for 5 minutes, though, like, I don't know if you could tell, but I got like a lot of things going on. And it's like one of those things where, like, the first couple times I ever tried to like meditate or do something like that, it's like you shut your eyes and you don't have like a timer or anything.
Right.
And then you're just like, oh my God, this is going on for forever. And you look and your eyes been closed for like 14 seconds and you're just like, what the hell? It felt like an hour, but yeah, just like you said.
That's why I tell people to count their breath, though, because you're giving your mind something to do.
Something else, right?
If you don't give your mind something to do, you're going to be like thinking about, whatever, baseball or dinner or, sex, whatever. But if you give yourself something to do, you go, okay, we're going to count. We're going to count 4. We're going to exhale on 6.
Right.
And then before you know it, like you're going, oh, okay. Your timer might go off and you're like, oh shit, I was just getting into it.
Yeah.
And you might, so you have to trick yourself a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Like reprogram, I think you said before. And that's really what it is. All right. So before we get into our last question, with our closing segment, I have one more question. Okay. So as you're a entrepreneur, you are, obviously a passionate James Taylor fan. I don't know if we've established that enough over the course of this episode. But one of the things that I do always like to talk with my guests about is kind of like looking into the future, right? So if there's things that you have on the horizon that you're hoping to accomplish, maybe in like the next year, maybe it's with yogic writing, maybe it's with the James Taylor group. I don't know. It could be anything. What are some things that you're hoping to accomplish next year, next 2 years, some like a shorter term goal?
Yeah, I'm in the middle right now of writing a book on the practice of yogic writing. It's called From Your Mat to Your Memoir. And I'm about halfway through right now. So that's definitely a short-term goal that will be done by the beginning of 2022. Can't believe we're in 2022 already.
Seriously, it's unbelievable.
I know, it's just gone by so fast. So that's definitely a short-term goal. And the book has nothing to do with James Taylor. It is about this process of writing and about incorporating simple mindfulness, meditation, and yogic practices into your writing so that you can work through blocks and resistance. So my short-term goal is definitely to finish that book. It's, as I said, it's called From Your Mat to Your Memoir. So that's definitely in the short-term horizon. And other than that, I just like to see where my husband and I, we have 3 kids and 4 grandchildren, And we're just right now trying to decide, as funny as it sounds, like, are we going to stay in Rhode Island? Are we going to move? Or what are we going to do? We're kind of playing with that. We're kind of opening up because the kids are out of the house.
Right.
And they all live in different places, 3 kids, 3 different states. I try not to take that personally, but we're going like, maybe, so we're kind of thinking on those things too. So definitely the book, and definitely getting a little bit more clear on what the next decade is going to look like for us.
Awesome. No, I love that. All right, so let's move the show into our closing segment, which we call Under the Spotlight. So the Spotlighters have been listening to Mike Hamm and Rebecca Gold talk for the last 45 minutes. We've been going for 45 minutes.
Wow.
This has been tremendous, and it didn't even feel like that. I just looked down at my little timer over here, and I was like, holy cow, we've been rolling. And we probably could keep going. Because I'm learning a whole bunch of new stuff.
Keep going, sure.
But so what would be one thing that you would want the Spotlighters, which are my listeners, to walk away from this episode with? So you're under the spotlight.
Oh my gosh. I knew you were going to ask that because I've listened to your show. And first I had 2 things. First, I had this quote that I love by Maya Angelou that says, there is no greater agony than bearing an untold story, which I love that because people do have these untold stories. And if you hold them in and you hold them in and you're on your deathbed and you're going, shit, I really wish I would have told that story to leave as my legacy. Definitely that is something. But how can I not leave with a quote from James Taylor?
I mean, I would be insulted if you didn't, honestly.
Right. And out of all of his songs, out of 50 years of performing, I still come back to my favorite song, which is called The Secret of Life. And I'm just going to read the first stanza of the song because to me, that means so much. And I think it would mean so much to anybody, regardless of their age. The secret of life is enjoying the passage of time. Any fool can do it. There ain't nothing to it. Nobody knows how we got to the top of the hill, but since we're on our way down, we might as well enjoy the ride. Isn't that great?
I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah. So we're going to enjoy the ride on our way down, no matter where you are. And that it's just that simple.
Yeah. I love that.
That's simple.
Yeah, a lot. That was awesome. Great Under the Spotlight segment right there. All right, so if people want to learn more about you, learn more about the books, whether it's Life with James Taylor, the upcoming book from your Match, your memoir, or any of the other books, I'm looking at your website right now. You have a few listed up here. Where can they go to learn more?
Sure. They can go to lifewithjamestaylor.com. That is mostly about the James Taylor book. On Facebook, also Life with James Taylor, my Facebook page. And my website, my yogic writing website is yogicwriting.com. And it's YOGICWRITING, yogicwriting.com. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram, Rebecca Gold. But probably the best place to get me would be at lifewithjamestaylor.com. And that connects you to everything else.
Awesome.
James Taylor connects us.
Yeah, exactly. I think you probably did that on purpose. Like, so the Life with James Taylor, like that, it's all part of the grander
it's all part of
message.
The big picture.
Exactly, right.
Oh, and by the way, Mike, James Taylor is a Red Sox fan. So just so you know,
right. Yeah.
Well, now you're not going to like him, right?
Well, we're never going to have him on the show. So,
Funny.
Not because he's too famous for me, but just because he's a Red Sox fan.
There you go.
But awesome. So, Rebecca, this was great. So for the listeners, I'm going to make sure that I put all those links that Rebecca just mentioned, her social handles, lifewithjamestaylor.com, yogicwriting.com, all those will be in the show notes. So if you do want to go check that stuff out, please do, and reach out to Rebecca. I'm sure she'd love to hear your story for sure. I will make sure that I put the morningspotlight.com and the morningspotlight@gmail.com, the website and the email address of the show. If for some reason you want to go through me to get to Rebecca, be happy to make that connection as well. Rebecca, thank you so much for coming on with us today. A unique episode for sure, but a tremendous one nonetheless. So I really appreciate you coming on.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, definitely. And the Spotlighters, thank you for listening, and we will catch you next time.